The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, originally released in 1998, is still considered by many to be the greatest game of all time. And with a near-perfect 99 on Metacritic, it shouldn't be surprising that people receive it in this way. And to be honest, I almost wanted to skip this one because no matter what I say on it, people are either going to disagree and be super pissed off, or agree and just be confused on why I'm even making this video. But since I agreed to review every single Zelda, it wouldn't really make sense to skip the first one that's in 3D. And especially given how iconic this one is, I might as well take a look at it. So, is The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time still a masterpiece, or has it aged its way out of that title? Now, to get started, I think it's worth mentioning this review is going to be a little bit different than the other ones. Previously, I've just been doing pros and cons of each Zelda game, but for this one, it's a little bit more difficult to do that, and also because this has significantly more pros than cons, because, well, it's considered one of the greatest games of all time. So for this one, I am just going to go place by place and explain what I like about it and what I had some problems with. And to start off with, we have maybe the most iconic opening cutscene of all time. We have the Great Deku Tree talking to Navi the Fairy about Link, and then Navi in a really sick 3D perspective, which, by the way, was brand new with this game, and this cutscene in particular, moving around through Kokiri Forest, which honestly is still really cool to see to this day, and just imagining these 3D visuals and how they looked to someone in 1998, it's pretty cool to look back on. And also, we are first introduced to Link as he is laying in bed sleeping, which is always the perfect way to be introduced to our hero. Following this, we are introduced to the first thing that Ocarina of Time does so well that A Link to the Past kind of faltered in: characters, as we are immediately met with Soraya, and our first main-ish character in the game. And this game has a lot of characters compared to every Zelda before it, which is probably why it was so special when it released and is still special to this day. But anyway, we go on with our adventure, and you need two things to leave the forest and go inside the Deku Tree. And what you need is a sword and a shield. Of course, the essentials of any Link. And getting through this is pretty fast and pretty easy. I would say almost too fast. But the fun is just meeting all of the Kokiri and just exploring around a little village that honestly is so innocent. And the fact that it's just a bunch of children running it in the middle of the forest. This is a very childhood kind of nostalgia thing for me and for many other individuals. But also because this opening act is so iconic just in and of itself. And it really resonates as the happiest point in the game, and how things are only going to go downhill from here. Also, inside the Deku Tree is a pretty basic dungeon, but it's not necessarily bad in any way, but the Goma fight is pretty fun. And following this, the Deku Tree gives you a very, very long monologue about what's going on, which isn't my favorite way of exposition, but whatever. And then you are on your way to Hyrule Castle. But first, having another emotional scene meeting with Soraya. And in this scene, she gives you the Ocarina, and again, you are on your way. And I love the subtlety and just how sad this scene is, but also how things are afterward. I don't know. I just like how this game is more slow-paced than the other ones, which were very much so just a rush to the end. And speaking of a rush, getting to Hyrule Castle is fine, but many people complain that there's nothing to do in Hyrule Field. And while this is technically correct, other than Lon Lon Ranch and a few other places that are closer by Lake Hylia, yeah, there's not a lot to do here. But honestly, I don't really mind, because if you think about it, roads to get anywhere, there's not really a lot of stuff to do to begin with. I think I'm a bit more neutral on this than I should be, but I just like that this game doesn't force you to go to random places before finally getting to the castle. It's more like you just go into Hyrule Castle Town and then boom, you're at the castle. And speaking of Hyrule Castle Town, I should just say that I love the towns for this game because all of the towns are amazing. And Hyrule Castle Town is definitely a great example of this. And that also goes for its incredible music. And speaking of the soundtrack, this game has amazing music, and personally has my favorite OST of all time. And honestly, I'm not really expecting that to change anytime soon. But anyway, moving on, you finally get introduced to Princess Zelda. Simply put, the interactions with Princess Zelda in this game are honestly a little magical. Well, the interactions are, of course, awkward at first, and it's kind of funny just looking at Link just standing there while Princess Zelda tells him about all of her dreams. It's still kind of cool, and especially given what the age demographic was probably supposed to be for this game, I'll allow it. And, of course, just interacting with Zelda plots out the entire plan for the rest of the game, but also, as we'll see later, shows the plan that doesn't work out so well. But first, you have to go to Dodongo's Cavern and Goron City. And this part of the game is where the game sort of dragged a little bit, but then caught back up during Zora's Domain. And honestly, that's not really a bad thing, as the game is perfectly fine in terms of its pacing. Both of these dungeons are pretty good, and Jabu Jabu's Belly particularly is very underrated. I know a lot of people hate it, but honestly, I really don't think it's that bad, and I kind of have fun with the boomerang in this one. Although the dungeon's boss is very unmemorable. But anyway, you kill the parasite and move on to Hyrule Castle, where you discover everything has gone wrong. Zelda escapes, chucks an Ocarina of Time into the water, and then Ganondorf basically just throws you into the dirt. And of course, your goal is to go into the Temple of Time, pull the Master Sword, and yeah, that's when everything goes wrong. And one of the great twists of gaming, as it turns out, Ganondorf completely trolled you. And as a result, you have to wait until your adulthood to finally get one back on him 7 years later. In what, to me, is still one of the best plot elements of this game. To be completely honest, moving into Hyrule Castle Town right after the Temple of Time is one of the creepiest transitions of any game that I've played recently. This game really shows you the difference in how Hyrule has been ruled ever since Ganondorf took over, and makes you want to beat him up approximately 100 times more. Now, I think I got to the part of the video where I should probably pick up the pace, especially since we are already at over 8 minutes. So, moving on into the Forest Temple, well, let's just say this is my least favorite dungeon in the entire game, to the point where when I played through it this time, I used a glitch to skip through basically the entire dungeon, just because I was so sick and tired of playing it. Of course, I grabbed the fairy bow first, but I hate this dungeon. But the boss fight with Phantom Ganon is pretty cool, I guess. The Fire Temple is also actually kind of thrilling. This one is a little on the long side, but I still enjoy it for the most part. And the boss fight is really cool, and using the hammer again is really awesome. Next up is the Ice Cavern, which isn't necessarily an actual temple, more so than just kind of a cavern to collect some stuff before going to the Water Temple, which is nice, but also is a little strange that there's not really much to do in the Ice Cavern. Interesting choice, I guess. They probably could have added another medallion, but that probably would have been a bit of work. I'm not really sure what I'm saying here, but the Water Temple sucks. Yeah, this is often revered as one of the worst dungeons in all of Zelda. And while I personally don't think it's that bad, the Water Temple is not fun to play through. And a large portion of this is because you have to find 3 keys immediately, and there's always one that you're just not sure how to get it. And you have to constantly swap between water levels just to figure out where it is. And for me, it was the one on the basement this time. It's just not fun. And while the water temple isn't really as bad as a lot of people claim it to be, it's really not a fun point in this game, and I got really annoyed of it really quickly. But eventually I was able to defeat it and move on to the 2 best dungeons in this game, the Shadow Temple and the Spirit Temple, both of which are just really good, and that goes for every single part of it. And of course that also includes the boss fights of these dungeons, as the Shadow Dungeon has definitely the more frustrating boss fight. It's really unique, but also incredibly difficult, maybe the hardest boss fight in this game. And of course, Twin Robos in the Spirit Temple, which is one of my favorite boss fights in the game, and is really fun without having the need to be incredibly challenging. But finally, we have one last challenge, Ganon's Tower, and finally facing off against Ganondorf. To be honest, Ganon's Tower is mid, which shouldn't really be a surprise, because honestly, Ganon's Tower is mid in just about every Zelda game, with the only exceptions being, I guess, A Link Between Worlds, and if you count Breath of the Wild. But yeah, Ganon's Tower is just kind of whatever, and then you move on to the greatest tennis match of all time between Ganondorf and Link. And as long as you don't fail, you should win and move on to Ganon, in what I can only call one of the greatest final boss fights of all time. This game's ending really is perfect because it challenges you at first, and you really have to figure out your own strategy to it. It's not too easy and it's not too difficult, and that is what I appreciate about it. Ocarina of Time finally ends with you sealing away Ganon with the iconic line, "Curse you, Link." And of course, Zelda sending Link back to relive his childhood, which is sad, but touching. Honestly, it was hard to find critiques for this game. Ocarina of Time is just that well designed. And if I was just comparing this on its own without comparing it to any of the other Zelda titles that followed it, this would probably be my first 10. But since I am comparing it to other Zelda titles and that this one just isn't exactly perfect, I am going to give The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time still an excellent score of a 9 out of 10.